Hello and welcome to this special Wheeler Centre live stream event. My name is Elizabeth McCarthy. I'm a radio producer and presenter at 3RRR FM in Melbourne. We are live streaming tonight from the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation, and we acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, and elders of all lands that this event reaches. The reason we're here tonight streaming live from the Wheeler Centre is because of the precautions being taken in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. This event originally was scheduled for Montalto at the Mornington Peninsula. The Wheeler Centre and Montalto have a long history of working together to present books and ideas, and I'd like to send fond regards to John, Wendy, Heidi and everyone down at Montalto, the whole gang, as well as Jane at Antipodes Bookshops, who is the bookseller down at Montalto, and her team are, like many independent booksellers around the country right now, doing free deliveries of books to people, so you can jump online to Antipodes Books if you're down on the peninsula and get free home delivery of books. I'd also like to thank, of course, the Wheeler Centre. I'd like to thank Stella Charles, who programs Montalto events, and all the Wheeler Centre staff who work so hard to produce great programming year round. And here we are in Melbourne tonight in this UNESCO City of Literature, still celebrating books and ideas. And it's a great pleasure for me to interview Alice Bishop tonight. Alice grew up in Christmas Hills. Her first collection of short fiction, A Constant Hum, was released via Text Publishing last year. The beginnings of A Constant Hum were commended in the 2015 Victorian Premier's Literary Award for an unpublished manuscript, and then longlisted in both the inaugural Rochelle Prize and the 2017 Kill Your Darlings Unpublished Manuscript Award. In 2018, A Constant Hum was shortlisted in the Penguin Random House Literary Prize. Alice's work has also appeared in Meanjin, Southerly, Australian Book Review, Griffith Review, Overland, The Suburban Review, Visible Ink, Seizure, VoiceWorks and the human rights publication Right Now. Alice has a Master of Creative Writing, Publishing and Editing from the University of Melbourne. She's also the recipient of a Wheeler Centre Hot Desk Fellowship, and her essay Coppering was shortlisted in the 2017 Horn Prize. So without further ado, Alice Bishop, how are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm inside and I'm staying home in these really bizarre times. But I'm really happy to be here and being interviewed by myself. So I'm really excited. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. I personally have never felt like I've obeyed the law more in my life. I feel so obedient right now, and it's kind of like, you know, I'm looking at Daniel Andrews on the news each night just thinking I will do everything that man tells me to, and I've never ever thought that about a premier.
No, I agree. I think he's doing a great job, and
yes.
It's a really, really scary time, and lots of things are shifting, and lots of people are struggling, and yeah, it's eerie, and yeah, all got to stay home. So
we do. We have to be the goodies of the of Melbourne right now. So A Constant Hum is the book that we're here to talk about this evening. It's a collection of Black Saturday stories, and it's a collection of fictional stories grounded in reality. That reality being loss, shock, trauma, devastation, but also a reality that is about the strength of community, family, friendships, relationships, love, and the messiness of life. Some of the stories in this collection are fragments and some are longer form, and the characters are in various states of distress, disbelief, dislocation. They're complex characters, they're surprising characters, and they are richly drawn. And they're immersed in landscapes that they once worked in and worked with, landscapes that became ravaged by fires. And Alice's writing, in my opinion, is brilliant. Her imagination is that of a landscape poet. Her insight into the human condition is razor sharp and compassionate. And this is a radiant collection of stories, Alice. I'm so glad you wrote them.
Thanks Thanks, Elizabeth. It means a lot coming from you.
As someone so directly impacted by the Black Saturday fires, Alice, could you talk about how long it took for you to decide to write fiction about those fires?
Yeah, so in 2009, most people will remember what they were doing on the 7th of February. That weekend we now kind of collectively call Black Saturday. And as a lot of people, I think now, who remember what they were doing in the summer, which I'm not completely sure if it's been branded as Black Summer, people will forever kind of remember that as a kind of historical thing. But yeah, I was 22 on the 7th of February in 2009, and I was working in a pretty crappy retail job in Spencer Street DFO, and we were told to go home early because the tin building was too hot for kind of health reasons and stuff. So yeah, and on the way home I got a call from my dad, who said he thought that he'd run from our burning house and thought that everything had gone. And for me, it took a really long time to be able to write about that in a way, and my feelings of loss and my family's feelings of loss caused by that natural disaster. It took me a really long time to be able to write the stories that I felt really expressed that kind of longing for place and that displacement and the grief, and then also the hope, I think, of the bush regrowing. So it took me a really long time, and I guess I was kind of, I guess I'd call myself a bit of an apprentice, because I was studying as well over those kind of years. But I signed a constant hum in 2018. Which, yeah, it was almost 9 years after the fires. But I wrote a lot of crap after the fires. I think you kind of, there's different kinds of writing. There's writing that's more kind of personal, and there's writing that you work on really hard to make it kind of fit into a bigger picture. And I hope that's what a constant hum does. But yeah, it took a really long time. And I think that's important to talk about too, because so often we pressure ourselves to kind of come up with these things quickly, but they take time. Yeah.
Telling stories based around traumatic experience can allow self-expression and relief, and sometimes a catharsis. However, because of the nature of the trauma, it can slam dunk you back there. What was that process of writing like for you? Was it, did you find it really difficult? Did you have to take big breaks when you were writing? I think so. I think I also, I wasn't working, writing full time. I had to have a job and pay the rent and do all of those things. But I think too, because I focused a lot on other people's stories as well as my own, I really circled back a lot to the Royal Commission report, to neighbours, to speaking to my mum and dad about it. And I think that's kind of something that really rings true, I think, in situations like this situation where we're in a kind of unprecedented time. It's really important to keep those kind of communication channels over so you don't kind of get engulfed by your own story. And there were moments of, of feeling like that, feeling like maybe we'd never end up going back to Christmas Hills where our house was. And for a lot of people, they never made it back. But I think I was always kind of gathering little bits of imagery over those kind of years, whether it was, the new couch we got in our rental house that was kind of had this tacky print on it, and how, just these little tiny little details that built up this bigger picture of kind of loss and hope and I guess resilience is a word that's now a bit tainted, but yeah, the smaller details for me have been really important in not getting overwhelmed by the horror of events like Black Saturday, and to balance things like, obviously there were so many deaths, and my family were completely
lucky to have just lost a house, but it's a matter for me of, in A Constant Hum, I think I really wanted that balance between the really gritty horror of, burnt livestock or bodies, with hope and, with kids returning to the area and riding their bikes up and down the road, with the wattle resprouting, with, new relationships forming. So I really wanted to balance that. And by balancing that in my fiction and researching so much, I think that it really balanced it for me in my personal life.
Because I wanted to talk about that balance, or how you navigated that balance of fiction and non-fiction, because it would be really foolish of us to think that this is all based on real people. Obviously, calling it fiction, you've allowed yourself certain license to take your imagination where it would like to go. Could you talk about navigating that boundary there and in the process of writing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I was always in conversation with my parents. So there are quite a few stories in A Constant Hum that are directly from my personal experience of the bushfires, and my dad and my mum, to a lesser extent my brother, and I know they're watching, so hello. But I think, we talked a lot about that at uni, and it's a constant evolving conversation in that you can't really write someone else's story. So with fiction, you have to make sure you do as much research as possible. And even though I lived through Black Saturday, and I guess you could say I had a personal experience with Black Saturday, you still have to make sure that you're not, treading down a path where you're claiming other people's stories. And I think that was, it's a hard line to walk always. But with my parents particularly, like it was an open conversation. And I think if you have the conversation and it's, it's an open thing, then that's a good thing. But it's something I think writers and artists always have to think about. And I think you can write other people's stories too, but you have to do it with absolute respect and have a conversation, do the research, and put in the hard work. So a lot of the stories in A Constant Hum are stories about me and my dad, stories about neighbours, but in the fictional stories, there's no kind of identifying kind of qualities. I really wanted to catch a kind of a broad range of stories as well, because something like Black Saturday, something like COVID-19, something like the Black Summer that's kind of been kind of engulfed by the current news kind of white noise. There are so many stories that fall by the wayside, that the bigger retellings of these events kind of swallow up, intentionally or not. And I think we can only really see the bigger picture if we listen to women's stories, and we listen to stories of people of all backgrounds and all ages, and kids' stories too are really something that I was interested in writing about after Black Saturday, because there seemed to be in mainstream media in particular a very cliche kind of happy stories about kids getting new bikes from the Red Cross tent, or the kind of cliche stories of mothers huddling in dams, being the kind of maternal protector of children. And I think that was something that I subconsciously at first, but then later realized I wanted to kind of dig a little bit deeper, and because that wasn't the story that I felt that I saw when I was sitting on the couch watching the footage of Black Saturday, and maybe that's similar to today, where you never really think that you'll be on the wrong side of the news, and when you find yourself on the wrong side of the news, it's really scary, and it makes you really anxious. And I think about that. I think there's a bit of a similarity there with the current pandemic, is that we're kind of watching on all our screens and trying to get control through that. How that was the same for me after Black Saturday, but but it almost stokes your anxiety sometimes too.
Because it's the same, yeah. It's interesting you're comparing it to what's going on right now, because it is that idea of humans being in uncharted territory, where once there was order and control and routine and
Completely.
dailiness, and suddenly everything's sort of turned upside down. Not that I want to necessarily compare them strictly, but broadly, I suppose you can do that.
Oh, and I think I was brought straight back to Black Saturday, obviously with the Black Summer Bean, but the other day I was going for my allowed walk down in Thornbury down the road, and kind of a couple of police bikes drove past quite slowly. And it just kind of made me really remember how many army officers and police officers and SES workers kind of came to our road after our house burned down. And you really had that lack of control that once when you're in somewhere that you think's your home, you realize how close to the edge you are of it not being your home. And I know obviously people all around the world deal with that as a daily reality, refugees and so many different people, that's their daily reality. But as quite a privileged person in Australia, you kind of get a bit naive and you don't realize that we are so close to the edge. And I think I'll always remember after Black Saturday, we were standing, Dad and I and my brother and my then boyfriend and my brother's girlfriend and my mum kind of at the road where the poles had fallen down, and it was all kind of smouldering in this really big, and Dad and I talk about this all the time, there was this big SUV that came up to our letterbox, which was funnily enough still standing. And the windows wound down really, really slowly, and there were these policemen in caps and in kind of really intense uniform. And they said, "Oh, what are you guys doing here?" And my dad answered, and he said, "Oh, this was our house." And he was like, "Righto," and then just like wound up the window and moved on, because in scenes like that normal interactions seem to, it's kind of like a war zone. People think that people are looting. People think that they're going to their houses, their rubble, just to kind of take photos. And I always remember that scene. It's really stuck with me. And I think about it a lot. So for whatever reason.
Something I wanted to touch on is the fact that you inhabit so many characters in this book, or you dream up so many characters in this book. There's a cast of thousands basically in this book that you've written, Alice, and I'm curious about how you flip between characters. You're inhabiting characters that are of such a broad age range and genders and class status. So could you talk about flipping in between those characters and writing from different perspectives, and how you navigate that, and if that's particularly difficult or quite easy for you?
I love it. I think that I get really bored pretty quickly of writing the same kind of characters, but I really enjoy kind of thinking about one of the characters in A Constant Hum that I loved writing more than anything was the shoplifting character near the beginning. So she's a woman in her 50s from a low socioeconomic who's shoplifting and getting a thrill from that after the bushfires. And I think we've all been in those places, we've all been in that spot where you kind of feel like you have no control, and you have to get control in your life through some means. And
we've all been shoplifters, let's face it.
Haven't we? But I did, to be honest, you do draw on, even though you're writing I'm 33 and I come from my parents, my mum's a nurse and my dad's a retired principal, and I think that's that thing of going, that's the beautiful thing about writing and reading, is that you go, we're all the same, and I drew a little bit on those feelings of, when you're 14 and you're shoplifting from Target and you feel like it's the only way that you can kind of be acceptable or cool or whatever. And then there's this, there's the other extreme where you've literally got nothing left and you're unemployable because you've you're not tech savvy, or you don't fit a certain, bill, and people have got to do what they've got to do. And I think that for me, that was a really, I loved writing that story because it really just, I wanted to show that she is one of the smartest people and one of the, strongest people, and one of the, she's got a golden heart, but it's life's been stacked up against her. And those are the characters I love in songs. I love country music. I love reading, Lucia Berlin, and it's the characters that show you, what it is to be human. And I think I never really thought I would write many younger characters because I wasn't sure I was good at it. But then I wrote Sticks in a Constant Hum, which is about a girl who is kind of on the cusp of being pressured to be more feminine. She's at that age of like 12 or 13, and I kind of drew on how I felt at that age, where I was so happy. I was riding horses and wearing shorts every day, and chubby little me. I was real happy. And then I really wanted to draw on that feeling of realizing that there was these other layers in life that I was going to have to kind of live under. So I funneled that into that story. And then I was also interested in one of my dad's stories, his principal of Lilydale High School, and he said after Black Saturday, there was a kid, I can't remember if he was in year 7 or 8, and he came back into his office with, is it a diorama? Is that what you call it when you're looking, and it's like a setting and you can pull up the front? And he'd created a flat kind of curtain where everything looked great and it was all bush, and then he pulled up the bush curtain and it was just all rubble and ash. And I just thought about kids and how they process things, and how everything is so heightened. And for me, it was stories like that I heard that really, like, once I had a nugget of what was kind of emblematic of something else, I worked on crafting the bigger story around that.
You just touched on before how you're influenced by like Lucia Berlin, and
was that how you say your name?
I don't know. I say Lucia.
Okay, Lucia.
tomatoes. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah, okay.
But the writing in your book is lyrically glorious. And I sense that perhaps you're influenced by poets and songwriters. Would you like to speak to that at all?
I think in every interview I do, and she's actually a friend, but before I knew her as a friend, I love Josephine Rowe's writing. I love Talcott Awake's one of my favourite books of all time. It's a book that got me through some really kind of dark moments, because it just kind of grabs onto the everyday and turns it into something kind of quite ethereal, not to be too woo-woo. But I love Josephine Rowe. I grew up, all of my parents in the house that burned down, they had rows and rows and rows of records, Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and Tom Waits and Lyle Lovett and all these amazing storytellers that I think I was always kind of really drawn to that kind of the sadness, but also the kind of hope. And, like John Prine, who's actually sick at the moment, and I hope he gets better. But I think that I was really lucky to be kind of exposed to so much music and books. And I think too, struggling with bad mental health, being a teenager and in my 20s, earlier 20s, it was always kind of really, really comforting to kind of see the world through other people's eyes, and to see that the world is such a big place. And with, writers like Josephine Rowe, the characters are so complex and so far from cliche that there's huge comfort in that. And yeah, I think I'm always trying to read more and listen more and watch cinema, and because I don't think there's a real clear-cut line between forms,
Yeah, I was also seeing some Alice Munro in there potentially. I think she writes small town characters incredibly vividly.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about grief that you explore in the collection, Alice. The aftermath of bushfire is something you canvass heavily, and I'm keen to know about how you explore the differences in grief between the grief of losing a home, the grief of losing a loved one, the grief of losing a township. There are very different types of grief going on in the novel, and they're not all one and the same, are they?
No, they're not. I think they all come from the same place. I think, I guess being a fiction writer, you've got to use your kind of empathy muscle as the thing that keeps you going. And you know, I've touched wood. I've never lost anyone incredibly close to me, and it will happen to me like it happens to us all. But I've read Joan Didion's, is it the White Album? I've the White Album. Oh my gosh, I can't even remember what it's called.
Yeah,
but,
it is.
When it is.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought I was quoting like a Beatles record or something there.
You are as well.
Oh, okay, all right, cool.
Both Joan and the Beatles, very good company.
Okay. But it's a matter of researching. It's a matter of human stories, I guess, not to sound too broad, but they happen in circles. And I think too, I felt a lot of grief halfway through writing this manuscript because my partner, who I'd been with for 5 years and lived through the bushfires with, abruptly kind of our relationship deteriorated in a very bad way. And I kind of held on to that kind of complete, that feeling of just of loss and grief and heartbreak, and funneled that into other stuff with research as well. And when you're talking about losing people, I've made friends over the years who there are beautiful writers. So Ella Holcomb, who's got a beautiful picture book out. Anyone who's got kids who are struggling even with this current crisis, she lost both her parents in the fires on Black Saturday, and she kind of tackles that through really soft and subtle and beautiful storytelling in Our House on the Mountain, it's called. And I think too, winding back around, I did in my master's, I was really lucky to do a class with the great Tony Birch, who most listeners will know, and we did a subject called Genealogies of Place, and it was all about treating kind of landscape as a character within itself. And for me, that was such a big starting point, for seeing Christmas Hills and for kind of having a container to put those feelings of grief and loss of place into, in that it kind of almost felt like grief because, obviously there are different tiers of grief, but I really, really, really missed it like nothing else. I missed the familiarity, and I missed the trees, and I missed the wildlife, and I missed our house, and I missed that sense of normal life. And I guess that in itself was a bit of grieving. And I also missed, I was 22, and if you're 22 or 12 or 92, I think you miss that kind of feeling before, and maybe it's the same if you lose someone you love, is that you miss that feeling of thinking that things can just be okay. And once you see kind of what the end of the world will look like, or you see natural disaster, or I'm sure it's the same with war, or if you're a refugee leaving your family, or if you have a family member die from this virus, you kind of really grieve for before. And I think that's something that Dad and I always talk about, is that we always talk about before the fire us and after the fire us. And I think that's a really interesting, it becomes this really clear kind of defining thing before and after.
I should let viewers know that I have actually asked Alice prior to the interview about how far I can go with questions because I didn't want to trigger anything. And she said to me that she was untriggerable, which I appreciated very much. So I wanted to ask about this current season of fires and how you did you watch the news over the past few months? I have one of my oldest friends who I've known since 1983 was impacted very heavily by those 1983 Ash Wednesday fires, and it's an ongoing process still to this day for her. So when you see fires that happened over this summer, I'm keen to know how you felt about that and also what people should be considering as really important in the wake of those fires, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. I think I like to say also I'm untriggerable. Like you can't trigger me, but I'm sure you you can. But I think it was a really summer feels like 10 years ago.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
And that worries me. That really worries me that there are people right now who are just beginning to get on the long road of recovery, to use a cliche, but it is really bloody long, and people need support for years and years and years after, not just on the yellow ribbons on the anniversary or whatever. But it was a really hard summer. It wasn't as hard for me as it was for some people. If you'd lost family, I can't even imagine how triggering it would be. But I do remember there was that video of the koala that you probably saw that viral video of the woman getting the koala in her arms, taking her shirt off and trying to save it. And I think I watched that video like 20 times. And I do remember, I go out to Christmas in the rebuilt house. I go out there at least once a week, and we're really lucky to have a close family with my brother and my sister-in-law and their baby B. And I remember we were watching the news and Mum just said, she's like, oh, I can't wait for this coverage to be over. And it's really stressful because, you feel really guilty and you're watching the footage knowing how devastating it is for people, but also how, after bushfire, mental health problems arise, people turn to alcohol, drugs, domestic violence. It's just such a tricky, devastating time for people in the community. And there are always difficult conversations that are had in terms of, we got into a lot of kind of tense conversations about, if a fire does come back again to our house, what's going to happen, because we've got a fire bunker, which was, ridiculously expensive, and Dad worries that's a false sense of security. So, there are all these really tricky, difficult, it's about logistics and conversations that happen, but then there's also this incredible kind of guilt because, I was sitting opposite a friend who'd lost parents on Black Saturday having a coffee, and, it was hard for her with the smoke in the air and Melbourne being smoke. And I think sensory details are the things that take you right back somewhere. They smell of the ash in your nostrils, or the fact that you can't kind of see through over the city. It takes you right back to Black Saturday, or, I'm sure for the 1983 fires. And it's really hard to kind of, again, to use the kind of, it's hard to put it in a container when in our kind of culture, in kind of Western culture, we don't really have a grieving process as much as other cultures, and we're kind of told to kind of go back to work and keep making money and keep shopping and keep buying stuff to fill the house that you've rebuilt, and it's almost like this white noise rush of making sure everything's back, and you don't have time to kind of to stop and feel like shit, you know. And I think that's what I worry about too. And, you know, you're watching the footage of Summer Bean and now there's the coronavirus, you know, pandemic, which is, you know, completely horrific. And it just puts all of our national kind of attention onto something else. And there would be a lot of people really struggling right now.
Speaking of triggers, the constant hum of the title, I love the way you very playfully place various hums of various kinds throughout the collection. So there's the hum of power lines, there's the hum of the radio, the hum of white noise. It's a real sort of connective device that you've used there right across the stories. Could you talk about the way that was what you decided on would connect these stories and you know, just playfully placing the idea of a hum throughout people's lives in these stories?
Yeah, so so A Constant Hum was the name of my thesis that I did at Melbourne Uni. It came from a diary I'd written when I was 20, 21, and I'm not a diary keeper at all. But I was really quite anxious. I had an eating disorder in my early 20s that was made me not really function very well. And I think that kind of idea of a constant hum for me was a daily thing, an anxiety thing, and also to flip it on its head, it's also a really positive thing in that I've always been, you know, taking notice takes a lot of energy, and I think that the hum of the bush has been something that's really, on the other hand, really driven me to be okay, you know, whether it's the rosellas or it's the cicadas or it's, you know, the hum of the bush growing back after Black Saturday, which itself was, it was such a privilege. You know, it sounds so dumb to say that it was a privilege to watch, but it was a kind of once in a lifetime thing, in that the amount of energy, you know, everything, and that's what I kind of wanted to capture in A Constant Hum too, is that it looked like the moon, and then the hum of kind of regrowth came at about 3 months or something after the fires, and all these different species of plants grew that we'd never seen there before, and then they died off, and then different beetles came, and then birds that were more open air birds came, and it was just that hum of energy coming to a place that really drove me through my 20s. It was just this constant kind of backdrop to my life when things weren't going well, that every time I'd drive back up to the ridge, there would be, you know, new bush. And for me, that's something that I really, really hope, when you think about the climate emergency, you know, it's such a privilege for the bush to be able to grow back. And I worry that, you know, with the fire season that's just been, it's you know, those fires started in winter, and it's just that thing of the hum of anxiety about that, and to go back onto the negative side again, the hum for me was really linked into a lot of women in the book experience life under pressure, and I wanted to write about how, there's so much more pressure on women about what they look like, you know, how they act in relationships. There are a lot of relationships in the book that maybe might not be healthy. There are a lot of relationships in the book that are really healthy too, but that kind of constant hum of the patriarchy, I guess, to put it kind of bluntly. But I wanted to acknowledge that as well. So a lot of humming going on, but yeah, both good and bad.
You do that exceptionally well, and and I did want to also touch on the fact, and you have alluded to it a couple of times, that it is really refreshing to read a book about disaster from the perspective of women, so many women, and certainly there are men that are in the novel, obviously, but it's a real feminist perspective you bring to these stories. I'm also keen to know about your working relationship with editors and mentors and how that works for you. What does that collaboration look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess I was a pretty solo worker throughout my 20s, and then I think I was really I lived in a house with Laura McPhee Brown, who's got a book out at the moment called Cherry Beach, and we had a really, really close friendship. And kind of because when you're an emerging writer, you get so much rejection and you get so much self-doubt, and it's so heightened. And I mean I guess it's still, as an established writer, it's probably the same, but it was always really good to have friends who are really big readers. And for me, reading Deborah Levy and, Laura and I used to read her collection, Black Vodka, all the time. Mm-hmm. And that was really, really inspiring. And then I think because I'm not as shy as I used to be, but I was always a very shy person. And then I got a mentor for my thesis, Emmett Stinson, and it was really good to have someone give me that guidance, those weekly meetings to produce something kind of more long form. And then also, I guess I had a lot of mentors through my course: Tony Birch, Amanda Johnson, Antonia Pont, and I was always very quiet in class, but I think if you've got someone who's teaching you, whose work you really, really, really respect, you're going to work really hard, and it is really hard work. And you need to kind of have that feedback to be like, oh, this is, it's a bit shit, and it breaks your heart, but because you really respect their writing, you want to do it. You want to make sure you give it a good crack. But I was really lucky too to have David Winter at Text Publishing was assigned my editor, and he just really had the same vision of wanting A Constant Hum to be a book about Black Saturday and bushfire, but also allowed me to make it become a book that was about much more than the bushfire. From the outset, he said, if you're maybe with a different publisher, some people might have wanted you to be a bit more of a sensationalist book. And you know what, I really wanted to have a book published, so I'm really glad that I was allowed to have a kind of a book that wasn't as, flames and death and destruction, and to have those more subtle narratives of bushfire. So David was a really big part of A Constant Hum being the book that it is, but also my parents have always encouraged me to do what, I worked in a petrol station for a long time. I worked in retail, and they were always just really supportive of what I wanted to do. And there was no pressure, but then also, every time I go out, and visit my parents, we talk about music and politics and art and the world, and that for me is mentorship, and having friends that are interested in the same things as me, and big readers, and I think that's the true kind of mentorship is those relationships that mean the world to me. And if those people in my life like my work, then that's all that really matters. So yeah.
Have you always been writing ever since you were a kid?
Nah.
No.
I wanted to be an Olympic show jumper.
Of course, we all did.
Yeah, thank you. Some people were like, "What?" But I was terrible. Like, I had a pony who I loved, Harriet, and she was gorgeous, and I was just not very good at horse riding. But that's all I wanted to do. Is I just wanted to own a farm, maybe have like a chook. There was like a stage where I wanted a chook farm. And then I wanted like a goat farm, and then and then I turned like 16, and 16, your priorities change, and then I kind of like did a subject at uni that was like a creative writing one in my undergrad, and it was like the only one I didn't almost fail. So here I am.
Wow. Like, so writing sort of found you.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. It's a very romantic notion, I know.
Yeah.
And I'm keen about to know about the impact that winning awards and being on shortlists and things of that nature have had on you. Like, does that apply a lot more pressure? Does that make you feel loved and adored and, you know, give you sort of juice to go on? Could you talk about what that's been like? Because you've certainly been published widely and had a lot of slaps on the back, Alice.
Yeah, but you know, with slaps on the back, there comes a lot of rejection as well. You know, I'll get on Instagram and post about my slaps on the back, but not really my rejections. But yeah, no, I think for me, a big part of the book was literary journals, and Meanjin, Jonathan Green, has been a really big part of me feeling confident about my writing. He's published a few short stories of mine and essays, and yeah, Seizure, all these smaller literary publications for me were really benchmarks for my work. So I really hope that they continue to get funding, because I wouldn't have a book without them. I know that a lot of my friends who are writers are the same. But you know, I'm not going to say that, you know, you kind of watch the prize cycle or the you know, the shortlist cycle, and you can get too obsessed with that, and at the end of the day, you know, it's great, and it's a great way to earn money if you win, but it's such a small percentage of people who do. But I do think, in saying that, we have a really healthy literary community here in Melbourne, and we have a lot of kind of opportunities that I feel really lucky for, and even using those opportunities as things to spur you on to write more, or to kind of you know, it's really hard, you know, paying rent and doing all of that stuff. But if you have a prize in your diary on the horizon, you know, at least there's some structure to your creative life, is that you can work towards having something ready to submit to that prize. And a lot of the stories in A Constant Hum were written with that as kind of the carrot on the stick, you know, and that's why prizes and things are so important in Australia's kind of literary landscape. And it's also a really great way to discover writers that you haven't heard about before, or it's something I watch closely, as most people do, but you can't peg everything on it either. Yeah.
Have you had feedback from people who have been impacted by the fires, who have read the book? And I'm wondering what that's been like, hearing from people who have a pretty personal relationship to fires in this country.
Yeah, it's been a really special part of having this book out in the world, is having people tell you their stories. And I think in so many different aspects of our life, we don't really share our stories enough. And I was in Alice Springs for the 2019 Alice Springs Writers Festival. It was the first Writers Festival I'd done. It was the best Writers Festival I've ever been to in my life. It was such a special weekend. And even up in Alice Springs, I was signing some books, and a woman came up to me and touched me on my arm, and she said, "Oh, thank you so much for writing this book." She said, you know, she was an older woman, and she said, I didn't lose a house, but I lost my relationship, and we got a divorce after Black Saturday, and I've never been able to talk about it, but I think I can talk about it now. And she said to me too, she said, "Oh, I moved up to Alice Springs because there's no crowns to catch light up here."
Wow.
And she also said after that, she was like, "Oh, but I didn't lose a house." And for me, it was like, we almost feel like, you know, and there is a hierarchy of loss, sure, but she felt like, so often with women, you know, we don't feel like we can take up too much space. And for me to have her come up to me in that intimate moment and to say, you know, I lost my my relationship to Black Saturday was a really powerful thing. And I get a lot of not a lot, but I've gotten quite a few emails from people who have said, I lived through Ash Wednesday, or I lived through the Canberra fires, and I remember saving my horse, or I remember the smell on the day, or, thank you so much. And for me, coming back to prizes, that's worth more than anything. And I feel, without getting too emotional, I feel like that's the thing,
And what are you working on now?
God, that's like the question that scares you. I'm working on an essay at the moment, and I'm going to start. I've got a few ideas. I've got like maybe a novel in the works, but I feel like it's bad luck to talk about.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I might actually ask you, Alice, to read from A Constant Hum now. I'm going to just sit back here with a glass of Montalto wine. As I mentioned at the top of the interview, this event usually takes place at Montalto on the Mornington Peninsula. So I might have some wine, and maybe you could read to us from A Constant Hum.
Sure, I'll be delighted. So this story is called Aftermath, and it was based on some footage I saw of a woman being interviewed, how she huddled in the dam as Black Saturday, during a Black Saturday fire, and it's towards the end of the book. So the book starts about 10 years from Black Saturday, and then it builds up into the day. Aftermath. Silt and grit and cinders. These are the things I wash from my baby's hair at my sister's house. Only hours have passed and we're in water again. Bath-bound this time. Trying to forget that dappled glow. The sky above us catching light. My ears hiss with the echoes of that deafening crackle, made by a hillside of eucalypt leaves curling with heat. The small floral jars of cream, untouched, stacked in my sister's cabinet, show me that she is still not happy. She's still trying to smooth herself.
Oh dear. Have we lost Alice?
I think we have.
Okay.
Makes a small noise.
No, she's back.
Is it okay, the connection?
It just dropped out for a little bit there, Alice. Do you want to go back maybe a few sentences?
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. The baby makes a small noise, something between a sigh and a hiccup, and I think of our bathroom cupboard, filled with things now burnt. A small bottle of tea tree oil, a pale yellow plastic toothbrush, cotton balls, an unworn blue coral ring. Interviewer. How long did you shelter in the dam before the fire rolled over? Before your neighbour, a true Aussie hero, some might say, discovered you and your little girl? Interviewee. The tap dribbles cool water over my sunburnt knees. I pause when the pressure stalls, creating a low bellow creak from the wall-covered pipe. A small wave of residual panic pulls at the forgotten parts of me before my daughter and I are back in that dam. The fire about to roar over us like an aeroplane leaving. My throat narrows, then my lungs bloom before I regather enough to promise my baby her favourite dinner. Blueberry pancakes, Elkie? I ask in a soft voice, not unlike the one I comforted her with in that clay-coloured water a few hours before. She faces me in the bath. The whites of her eyes are still pink from smoke. Her tiny, 18-month-old hands fleshy and perfect. Cocoon my thumbs. The fresh water is cool and clean, comforting. Nothing like the dam water, smelling of pond and rain-soaked, dark earth. Safe now, though. Safe enough, but uneasy in valley suburbs, built by ordered red brick. I pull my baby out of the cool town water and up onto my chest. There's a comfort to having her close. In her breath, I can still hear what everything was like before. I imagine my sister restlessly tapping her small, neat nails on kitchen granite. She has what people would call a nice house. She buys lifestyle magazines filled with pictures of tanned, bearded lumberjack types walking flaxen paddocks alongside wool-clad wives. Tracy, my whittled back sister, is happy in her unhappiness. She embraces her discomfort as a sign of strength, that she's motivated to do better, pay more for softer hair, eat less for smaller clothes, live quietly for unlined skin. The stacks of magazines my sister piles high in shiny bedside bundles, they spur her on. Interviewer. Many people die when they find shelter in dams or tanks, known often by authorities as death traps. Tell us your message as a surviving mother who may have potentially made a fatal mistake. Interviewee. Mum's sandy voice finds a way to squeak through the cracks in the bathroom door. Her already high and uneven tone has risen. It just doesn't seem real, Trace, she says then. They could have burned too. It will be weeks before I can wash the earthy smell of silt from my baby's hair, along with the sharp tang of chemical ash, seemingly soaked into skin. Rowena, Mum yells this time, piercing and a little too much like a shriek. Are you okay in there? The baby's tiny hands are in smaller fists. The backs of them are turning blotchy and white. Her short eyelashes, thick, are still wet and stuck together in clumps. We're okay, I whisper. We're okay, hey.
Thanks, Alice. You've been listening to Alice Bishop reading from her collection of stories, Constant Hum, and it's been my pleasure to spend the last hour talking to Alice about this collection of stories. Don't forget that lots of independent booksellers at the moment right around the country are selling you books online from their websites and then making delivery free. So please, it is a way to support your local bookseller at this very strange time in our country's, and indeed our world's history. Wishing you very good health, Alice, and hoping to catch up with you face to face sooner rather than later. Thank you so much to the Wheeler Centre for tonight's event, and wishing everyone who's watching good health as well. Thank you.